What's up, Calvary's Love Church? John Woodrick here, one of the pastors at Calvary's Love, and I have my amazing friend with me, Jordan Elliott.
What's up, guys?
And Jordan actually is Chi Alpha, BU campus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yeah.
And we are week one with house church. So if
cool.
Cool.
And
dude, I love you, bro. You're hilarious. But we are just excited about what God is going to do in house churches. This is week one, and we are just going to be looking at a biblical theme in a moment. But before we do that, if you're joining us online for the first time and you're used to seeing a normal kind of service flow, it's going to look a little bit different because we just launched something really, really big last week at Calvary's Love Church, which we are now in house churches bi-weekly. So that means twice a month we're in our large gathering, which means next week we'll be back at our campus across our network. So that's Owego and JC. And then the following week we'll be back in house churches again. So we're going to be doing this for a while, and we're really excited about it. We have amazing house church leaders all around the network right now and all of our campuses. And hopefully you're watching at home with some family, with some friends. Give your house church leaders a high five. They're amazing people, and we're excited for this new vision that God has put on our heart. So It's going to be good. So what we're going to do is we are going to actually look at a biblical theme called Does God Test Us?
Ooh, good question.
I think one of the reasons that I've wanted to talk about this biblical theme is because being everything COVID pandemic related, there's this revelation that's taken place, and there's just like a lot of revealing.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people have gone through tons of stuff.
Yeah.
Tons of stuff.
Yeah.
And so looking at this whole idea of like, does God test us? Like, what does that look like? And just kind of talking about it. Jordan and I are just going to have a raw conversation for about 10 minutes. And as soon as the timer goes off, we are going to totally stop.
Yeah.
And then we have a video that you can check out.
We're sticking to the time.
We're going to
do it.
We're going to do it.
Even if it's mid-sentence.
Right. We're just going to stop and be like, hey, it's over.
Done.
All right, here we go. 10 minutes on the clock. All right. Biblical theme. Does God test people? What do you think?
What do I think? Honestly, when we first started, this idea was thrown out, I was like, oh man, what? Do I believe that? And when you go through scriptures, there's so many examples of God testing us. And even today, how God is testing us. And yeah, I'm really excited. I got some stuff that...
Yeah, hit me with a scripture verse.
Okay.
What do you got?
Okay, so my first one that I thought was really cool, it's Exodus chapter 20. And basically what's happening is Moses is having this conversation with God in the mountain. And
is that like pre like Exodus?
No, this is post Exodus.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right. Gotcha.
And so basically he comes back down, and then it says God comes down like a cloud with thunder and with lightning, and it says like the people are afraid, and Moses says to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that his fear may be before you, so that you won't sin." Mm-hmm. And I just thought that was so interesting that like he's coming like so powerfully, and people are like afraid. They're like, oh well, they say to Moses like, we'll listen to you, but like we don't want to listen to God. But it's like we're afraid of him, that we're gonna die.
Yeah.
But Moses like, don't fear, he's actually coming to test you. And I think that's so interesting.
That is interesting. Yeah, that's good, man. That's good. So I really was thinking about this as well too, and this whole idea of God testing us. Like I've seen my wife go through. She's getting her master's right now, and so like I see what she goes through when she's going to take a test, and it's like shredded. I mean, she's like, this test is huge. And a lot of times, I know for me, when I've like, because we've gone through those various different things with testing, we can think like tests are just bad.
Right.
But if you look at like what tests do, like we have to take really a test for everything in life if we ever want to like move forward. So we have, like driver's license, we have to take our test to get our driver's license. We have to take a test for, various different schooling or credentials if you're going to be a pastor. I mean, there's always like this marker. So it kind of establishes like, it can establish our knowledge. It can be approving of ourselves and sometimes our character based on like what we're going through. And so I went back to I went old school, bro, all the way back to Genesis 3. And I just thought it was really interesting that like right from the beginning, test.
Right.
Like 2 trees.
Yep.
And knowledge of good and evil, tree of life, God putting before man a choice. And I just thought that was really like interesting. Like right in the beginning, there was like this test put in front of them.
Yeah.
And it's like they had to choose.
Yeah.
Like how they wanted to live. Do they want to, choose the tree of life, which Proverbs 3 talks about that. You can look that up if you want. Talks about the tree of life, what that is, or do they choose to do something that God told them not to do?
Yeah, that's good. I was looking into this too, and this idea of like asking yourself, who am I being tested by? Because if you're being if the tester is looking to deceive you or to trap you, like, yeah, that's like, sometimes we can get in this mindset of like, even with COVID-19 right now, like, oh, this is like Satan that's doing this and causing these issues, but sometimes we need to look back and say like, oh, maybe God's doing something here. And even
through it.
Even with like Adam and Eve, like God was putting that before them, like, and he is good, and he's putting that test to test, like, do they love me? Mm-hmm. And will they choose me?
Yeah. And how do you respond to the various different conflicts in front of you? Could be a test, or maybe not. I don't know. There's that tension there.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's the idea of like, so I was looking to it like, then you fast forward because so Adam and Eve, first generation, second generation, Cain and Abel, test.
Yep.
So God put, like, basically came to Cain and said, hey Cain, if you do what's right, then you'll be approved. And he comes to him like as this loving father, like really gracious, like God coming to Cain, like telling him. And Cain still decides, hey, I'm not going to listen to God, and gets jealous, kills his brother. And then you fast forward and you have like Abraham in the test, which is like, Abraham was given a promise, like, all the stars in the sky are going to be like just his descendants. And then he kind of takes things into his own hands with, trying to have, a family quicker than God allowed him to do. And so then it's like kind of messes it up, but then God later brings him to, again, a place of where he is able to be tested, where it's like, hey, offer your son to me.
Yeah.
And obviously God saves his son from that. So it's like these testing places that like allow us to prove our character to God, but yet the weird thing is like my question was like always, how come we keep like failing in that? Like, why would God keep testing us if like we're just gonna keep like showing him that we can't do it?
Yeah. Well, I think what's really cool is, you brought up like Cain and Abel, and then there's Abraham and Sarah, and like we can keep looking forward, the Israelites in the desert, and then it keeps like people just keep failing this test.
Right.
Like God is like calling them, like, hey, do this, like you can do this, puts the choice, and then boom, there's this failure. And what I think is really cool is that we get to like Jesus.
Yeah.
And he goes out into the wilderness for 40 days.
Right.
And he has no food, he has no water, and then this idea of like this rebel is coming to try and trap him.
Right.
Satan comes trying to like deceive him and tempt him, and he passes the test.
Right.
And completes it, and he proves himself the loyal one.
Right.
Which I thought was like really interesting to think about. Like all throughout the Old Testament we see, like beginning Adam and Eve, like we talked about.
Yeah.
And then we get to Jesus. I think it's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it is for sure. And it does, like, so you have this idea of like man consistently broke covenant after covenant with God, multiple tests put in front of us, like you just said, and then we fail, and then it's like God like basically has this plan that he has rolled out from the beginning of time to save humanity, and Jesus, like you said, goes through that wilderness, completes that test, and conquers all those various different obstacles, and shows basically what it looks like, right? And then does it on our behalf because we couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But then this idea still of like, okay, Jesus did all that, right? He died, rose again, so then we still have things that we go through now that could potentially test our character, test our motivations, things that maybe we go through. I think sometimes it's easy, like I've heard people say like, hey, this is happening to me because like maybe I'm living a sinful life, so God is like punishing me, which is sometimes like hard to, I don't know that I always agree with that theology,
right?
Just because of like what the wrath of God was satisfied in what he did with Christ,
right?
But yet obviously we have consequences for our actions, but yet at the same time, like tests can be in front of us where it's like,
how do you think that we are today are being tested? Like some examples.
Me personally?
Yeah.
Okay. Real quick, we got 1 minute 46 seconds. How do I think we're being tested today? Well, I think in the sense, so I read this article recently, and this is a good example, and I'll say it quickly. Basically, parents that are involved in all these sports, right? I mean, their lifestyle is sports, getting their kids plugged in so that they could go to these different colleges, and everything they did, travel teams, and then it was all like, COVID shut down, and this family specifically writing this article, this isn't like not a Christian article, this family was basically saying like, then they tried to set up their whole entire home as a place where like people could still like operate that way. So all their kids were like doing all these things in the backyard to basically still be able to like maintain their athleticism for what they have been doing in sports. And it was they were saying like they were like killing themselves as a family, and they realized this revelation again that like they were like, why are we doing this? Like we're really hurting our kids and our family by trying to like push this forward. And really what they realized is they were like, they didn't use this word, but it really is like idolizing something over God and the values that he has for us. So I think like those are big examples where we can, with this revelation of everything we've been going through as a pandemic, can show us how do we lead through this time? What do we trust in? What do we value?
Yeah.
And there can be this real deep like inner thought that takes place with like being put right in it, Yeah. 16 seconds.
Final thought.
I will say this. Okay, final thought really quick. 10 seconds. I think it's really, really amazing. I'm gonna go over as a pastor, so I'm gonna end it right here. So I think it's amazing that tree of life in the garden.
Yeah.
Okay. Fast forward, and Jesus calls himself the tree of life in John 15.
Yeah.
And then humanity kills Jesus, the tree of life, and then moves Jesus, and you see Jesus now hanging on tree of life, on the cross, tree of death. And then we look fast forward into Revelation, and it shows like Jesus completing all these testings now, where it's like new heavens, new earth, Jesus there, and tree again, right of life, right in the center.
Boom! We went all the way to Revelation.
We were all the way to Revelation. I don't even know where I was going with that. I think I like watched this. I watched this thing on the Bible Project about it, and it was just like I had to get that in there. I don't know why.
Yeah.
It had nothing to do with. I guess it did. All right, here we go. Yeah. All right, so that was our conversation on does God test people? Some off-topic stuff, some good stuff, and that was fun.
Yeah.
So check this video out, and hopefully it'll answer some questions that maybe you do have, or maybe that we didn't answer, and hopefully you enjoy it. Thanks, guys.
See you later.
The story of the Bible begins with God creating a beautiful world and then sharing it with all of his creatures.
And he appoints Adam and Eve to rule it on his behalf.
And God gives them access to his wisdom and life, but then tells them that there's one tree they can't eat from because it will lead to death.
So they have a choice about how to rule with God. This kind of feels like a test.
Well, that's because it is a test.
But isn't that kind of cruel for God to test them?
Well, not all tests are bad. Let's say there's a king who chooses you to fulfill a royal task because he wants to know if you are trustworthy.
Well, I guess that's a test, but really it's an opportunity to do something important and noble.
Right, but then let's say there's a rebel who hates the king and you, and he tries to convince you that you would be better off not doing what the king asks.
Well, the rebel is setting a trap.
Right, so a test could be an opportunity or a trap. And the difference is whether the one testing you has your best interests in mind.
I see. And both types of tests appear in the beginning of the Bible. God tells them to eat of the tree of life and not the forbidden tree.
Yeah, this is God's test of loyalty. God wants to rule the world with humans as his partners, which means they will need to trust his wisdom over their own.
But then a rebel comes and tests them to eat of that other tree.
Right, the rebel seizes this opportunity and twists it, so he can lead the humans into exile and ultimately death.
He turns the test into a trap.
But after the humans fail, God promises that one day a human will come who will pass the test and defeat the snake. And as the story moves on, God gives a couple named Abraham and Sarah an opportunity to trust him by leaving their family behind, to go to a new land where God will use them to restore his blessing to all people.
So this is a test.
And at first, things go well. But Abraham quickly fails. He lies to protect himself, and then he and Sarah scheme to get a son their own way by abusing one of their servants.
Definitely not passing the test.
But God doesn't give up on Abraham. He gives him one final opportunity, a test to prove his loyalty. God asks Abraham to go up onto a hill and offer his son as a sacrifice.
I can't imagine a more intense test.
And Abraham does it. But in the last moment, God stops him and provides a substitute animal in the place of his son. God then says he will fulfill his promise through Abraham's family because he passed this test.
So Abraham passed this test, but he hasn't proven to be a fully trustworthy partner. We're still waiting for someone who can pass the ultimate test.
Yeah, and as the family of Abraham grows and becomes a nation, God continues to test them.
Like when the Israelites wander in the wilderness for 40 years.
They have lots of opportunities to trust in God, to provide water or daily bread.
But they instead blame God and even say that he trapped them in the desert to kill them.
And so the rest of Israel's story in the Hebrew scriptures is pretty much the same. The Israelites don't trust in God and his promise. They're not loyal, and eventually the whole nation fails.
So humans have an amazing opportunity to partner with God, but no one is really qualified.
And so all of this brings us forward to Jesus. There's a story where Jesus goes into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights without food or water.
Ah, yes, the wilderness. And there, he meets a sinister creature who tries to trap him.
But Jesus trusts in God's wisdom.
And he passes the test.
Then later there's a story about Jesus going to pray with some friends, and God commissions him to go up to Jerusalem and to give up his life.
And so he goes. And on the night of his arrest, Jesus took his friends and went to a garden.
And he told them to pray because tonight, he said, is the great test.
And he prayed to God, please let this test pass from me, but not my desire, rather may your desire be done.
In this garden, Jesus shows us what passing the test looks like. He trusted in God's wisdom, he loved others more than himself, and he confronted evil with good.
Even though it cost him his life.
Right. Jesus offered his own life as a sacrifice to cover for all of the failed tests of his people Israel and of all humanity. Jesus passed the ultimate test on behalf of us all.
This is amazing, but that doesn't mean everything is gonna be great in our lives. I mean, let's be honest, we're gonna face our own tests every day.
Right. Jesus said every generation of his followers would have their own tests that will force them to trust God in radical new ways.
And these tests can be difficult and often painful.
But remember, a test from a good God is an opportunity. This is why James, a leader in the early Jesus movement, said that we should be grateful when we face tests and trials because they offer us a gift. It's an opportunity to surrender to God's wisdom and to become more like Jesus, the one who loved us and who passed the test on our behalf.
Guys, I hope you enjoyed that video, and we're going to move into time of giving right now.
Yeah.
I've heard it said a lot of times that when we think of giving, we think of music. We think of, going through the Word, talking about it like we just did. But really, it's a lifestyle, and it's just everything that we do.
Yeah.
So we're just excited with everything that God has given us that we can give back. And I just want to thank you guys as a church. You know, we've been through it as a church. We really have. I mean, globally, the church has been through it. But to see how faithful our church is during this time has really just blessed me. It's encouraged me as a follower of Jesus to say, wow, the church really, there is really nothing that can come against the church. Like, it's just so incredible to see. And so I thank you guys for everything that you do to make our church what it is. And we are all the church right now, every one of us in our homes, and we'll gather together next week. So you'll see a prompt come up, and I'll show you how you can continue to give. And we're so excited to join with you again next week at our campuses across our network. And we're going to move into this time to where you can now connect in your house churches, and you can have a conversation about, does God test people? And hope your conversation is great. And we'll see you next week.